So I'd like to welcome all of you. Buenas tardes a todos, a todas, y a todes. For those that like to use the X, we pronounce it as an E, at least in the Mexican gender studies world. I want to first thank D-Case and the City of Chicago for hosting us today. It's a great, great honor, specifically because we just have experienced the Chicago Marathon, which we hadn't fully realized was on the same day of the special presentation by Luis Alberto Urrea here at Lit Luz 2019, so it's an honor twice over. Bienvenido de nuevo. Over the course of the week, there are more than 20, free Lit Luz events all across Chicago, including readings, conversations, film screenings, performances, and more at venues throughout Chicago, or what I prefer to call Chicagolandia. We invite you to attend and to join us at our closing event on October 19th, that is titled the Lit Luz Live Magazine Show, which will be co-presented at the Museum of Contemporary Art, so that's exactly 1 week from now. And that will feature debut collaborations from writers, artists, and musicians from Chicago and La Ciudad de Mexico. This is a moment, very important moment to create more spaces of dialogue and transnational, call it bicultural spaces of understanding and healing. For the full schedule, I invite you to go directly to our website, litluz.org, and on the top right-hand corner, you will see a list that includes the schedule and the bios for all our participants. Most of our events are bilingual. Some are just in English, some are just in Spanish. So we invite you to join us as much as possible. The formal introduction for Luis Alberto Urrea will be done by Dr. Daniel Buzitsky, if I pronounce his last name correctly. I've known him for years and I always mispronounce. He is the author of Lake Michigan, finalist for the 2019 Griffin International Poetry Prize, The Performance of Becoming Human, National Book Award winner 2016. His other books include In the Murmur of the Rotten Carcass Economy, Memories of My Overdevelopment, and the Book of Interfering Bodies. His translation of Galo Guillotos Valdivia received the 2017 Alta National Translation Award. He has translated books by other Chilean poets, including Raúl Zurita and Jaime Luis Wenun. He teaches English and Latin American and Latino Studies at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Finally, he is an artistic associate of Make Literary Magazines and Lit Luz Festivals. Por favor, please join me in welcoming. Muchas gracias.
Buenas tardes. Gracias, Héctor. Bienvenidos. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming out on this Sunday. As Hector was mentioning, this is part of the Lit Luz Festival, which is an ongoing now. This is the 6th year that began in 2014 and is a collaboration between writers and artists from Chicago and those from Mexico. A quick word of thanks to Lit Luz Director Sarah Dodson. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks to Hector for the introduction. Thanks to all the Make Magazine and Lit Luz staff who are here, Camilla Foreman, Colin Jordan, and others who may be here who I'm not seeing. And thanks everyone for coming. I'm going to introduce Luis Alberto Urrea. It's very hard to introduce somebody with such a vast library of books to his name, but I will do my best. One of my favorite books by Luis Alberto Urrea is his very first, his 1993 nonfiction narrative entitled Across the Wire, Life and Hard Times on the Mexican Border. It is at once lyrical, raw, vulnerable, funny, tragic, heartbreaking, politically and economically astute, and quite moving. Its narrator documents the communities that form around garbage dumps, serve as part of a roughshod mobile medical unit, travel around with Tijuana policemen who have no qualms confessing that they pull over motorists and blackmail them for sex, Urrea gives us an unforgettably vibrant portrayal of the borderlands, and Tijuana in particular, as a place where, quote, anything will happen, where whole neighborhoods appear and disappear overnight. As a Mexican diplomat once confided to me, writes Urrea, Tijuana is not Mexico, the border is nowhere. It's a no man's land. This idea of the border as nowhere, as a place from which the forces of the state and capital turn away, is precisely what leads Urrea to look even more closely at it. He is well aware that a U.S. audience may have little entryway into understanding the conditions of people living in these borderlands and the sacrifices they make to survive. The trash collecting, the trash eating, the diseased who have no access to clean water or medical treatment. The conditions he documents are extreme, but he always treats the people he writes about with great humanity, with respect and compassion and love, with careful detail and a poignant understanding of how economic policy, political policy, immigration policy, and nationalist rhetoric destroy the lives of individuals and communities in the nowhere state of the borderlands. Urrea tells the story of how hard it was to publish this book. Quote, I was rejected for 10 years straight, from 1982 to 1992. One huge-hearted New York editor said, quote, nobody cares about starving Mexicans. I and so many other readers are thankful for his persistence in making sure that, despite the uncaringness of New York publishers, policymakers, liberals, tastemakers, right-wing nationalists, and racists, despite the fact that they did not and do not care about, quote, starving Mexicans, I'm so grateful that he fought hard enough to make sure his stories have the audience and readers it deserved. In 2004, Luis Alberto Urrea published The Devil's Highway, a true story, which follows migrants as they travel from Mexico through the treacherous stretch of southern Arizonan desert known as the Devil's Highway. NAFTA, the 1994 North American Free Trade Agreement implemented under the Clinton administration, was supposed to improve economic conditions for Mexicans, and policymakers promoted the naive belief that NAFTA would reduce the number of migrants coming from Mexico to the U.S. But in fact, the number dramatically increased, from 3.8 million undocumented immigrants in 1994 to 12.2 million in 2007. This over 300% increase in undocumented migration during the NAFTA years has its roots in economic policy. NAFTA flooded the market with cheap American agriculture and goods, putting local Mexican farmers and entrepreneurs out of business, and millions were forced to leave their homes. At the same time, in 1994, the militarization of the border became U.S. immigration policy. Missions like Operation Gatekeeper in Southern California and Safeguard in Tucson were designed to prevent migrants from entering the U.S. at easier crossing points, forcing them instead to the most dangerous routes. This is the context for Urrea's brilliant, searing 2004 Crónica, The Devil's Highway. Many moments in this book stay with me, but one in particular hits me hard. At the end of the section, there's a shift from the specific experience of the individuals Urrea is closely following to a more generalized discussion of how people die in the desert. Stepping away from migrants, we learn of campers and dune buggy riders who get stranded in the desert, and then there is a stark shift in point of view from the third person to the second. A direct address to the reader, quote, your fever is spiking now. You want to vomit. Your tongue is wood. Your skin is icy. Sooner or later, you understand that you have to drink your own urine. Your temperature redlines. You hit 105, 106, 108 degrees. Your muscles, lacking water, feed on themselves. They break down and start to rot. The system closes down. Your kidneys, your bladder, your heart, they jam shut. Stop. Your brain sparks. Out. You're gone. I read this shift in point of view as a shift in both embodiment and responsibility. At this moment, the reader is asked to understand that the body of the migrant crossing in the desert is like their own. The way the migrant's body responds to dehydration is the way our bodies would respond to dehydration. The sharing of experience is also a sharing of responsibility. It is a moment where we, as readers, are complicit and where we might understand that the collective body dies when the individual body and the individual body of the migrant dies. When you died, says Big Angel, the larger-than-life patriarch of Urrea's 2018 epic novel, The House of Broken Angels, when you died in small doses. You had trouble speaking. You forgot who was beside you. You were suddenly furious and in a panic of outrage. You wished you could be saintly. You wished you weren't so weak. You suddenly felt better and fooled yourself into believing that a miracle was about to happen. Readers of Urrea's work will recognize how the approaches that fuel his nonfiction spill into his fiction, allowing him to create short stories and novels that stand out because of the verb and excitement of the narrative voice and the absolute generosity with which Urrea approaches his characters and readers. I'm going on too long, so I don't want to say too much more, other than I think that The House of Broken Angels is an amazing book. It is one of the best endings I've read in a novel. I bought copies of this book and shared it with so many people who I care about and love. I want to conclude by saying that Luis Urrea embodies the spirit of what the Lit Luz Festival tries to accomplish. Since 2014, Lit Luz has brought together writers and artists from Mexico with writers and artists from Chicago, giving a platform for Mexican writers and artists to share their work, and asking the Mexicans and the Chicagoans to collaborate on a shared work that they will present this year at the Museum of Contemporary Art next Saturday. But for me, the greater spirit of Lit Luz lies in how it asks us to think about Mexican literature and U.S. literature alongside of each other, to think of how these bodies of literature are informed by movement across borders, the failure of neoliberal capitalism to secure economic safety for workers on both sides of the borders, and the abandonment of individuals by society and the state, all of which we see in Luis Urrea's writing. His vast, dynamic library, written on both sides of the border, written in English and in Spanish, written for speakers of English and Spanish, written for the borders, between nations, and between life and death, is a literature that is neither of the U.S. nor of Mexico or Latin America. It is a literature of the Americas. Its impact reverberates way beyond national boundaries. It is a literature of documentation, of witness, a literature that carries with it a belief that language, individuals, and storytelling ought to be participating in the most important national and political discourses of our time. Luis Urrea is the author of 17 books, 8 books of fiction, 5 books of nonfiction, and 3 books of poetry. His many awards and honors include a Guggenheim, an American Academy of Arts and Letters Fiction Award, a Lannan Literary Award, the Kiriyima Prize in Fiction for The House of Broken Angels, an Edgar Award from the Mystery Writers of America, and a spot in the Latino Literature Hall of Fame. He was born in Tijuana and grew up in San Diego, and he is currently a distinguished professor, and I'm thrilled to have him as my colleague in the English department at the University of Illinois, Chicago. Please join me in welcoming Luis Alberto Urrea.
Buenas tardes, Chicago. Tijuana in the house. Colonia Independencia in the house. My family on the Mexican side comes from Sinaloa, so I'd like to say Rosario, Sinaloa in the house, even Naperville, Illinois in the house. We're talking about movement, aren't we? We're talking about our motion. I was born on Agua Caliente Boulevard, or Aguas Calientes Boulevard in Tijuana. My Chicano friends in the 70s used to say, "Órale, loco, you know, you to get to your birthplace, you go all the way down La Revolucion and then turn left." That was me, in the upstairs from a botica. My father was the most Mexicano ever born. He was insane for Mexico. Everything good was Mexican. Everything of value was Mexican. When he crossed over into the United States, he found himself diminished. He found himself insulted. He found himself erased. He was called names. He became a janitor, cleaning bathrooms for the rest of his life. Yet, Mexicanismo era lo máximo. And he taught me something. He taught me about Sinaloa. It's always been, in myth, a place of bandidos, gangsters. We're not going to even talk about Chapo right now. Let's talk about Pedro Infante. That was my father in Sinaloa. He grew up with Pedro Infante. My mother was from New York. She married my father. And I've been thinking about this theme, about what to say to you. My wife keeps telling me, don't get lost in stories. Tell them something. I say, no, I will. My father went from Rosario, Sinaloa to Mexico City, a journey that was inestimable in his day. He was a miner, silver miner at 13, got his first shoes at 14, helped amputate a miner's leg at 15 underground, got in the military and went to La Capital, found himself on the presidential staff. Is that an internal migration? I think it is. My mother from New York City, kind of a blue blood, World War II hero in the Red Cross, met my father after he had left Mexico City. Our family had settled on Rampa Independencia in Tijuana. He was living there with his mom and dad. And he took her to Tijuana. After my father's journey to the capital and then to the border, my mother crossed the border and immigrated into Mexico. Then I was born. I spent my first few years in Tijuana. I was Mexicano. I spoke Spanish before I spoke English. I looked American, but I was puro Mexicano. I worshiped at the Church of La Tortilleria, and I'm still there in my heart. To me, the most sacred sound in the world was, I didn't get that in the U.S., and they would send me with some pesos to buy a kilo de tortillas, Luisito, and I would walk up the dirt street to the tortilleria. You could smell it first. You could hear the radio, and then las mujeres doing this. And it's part of my job now. I'm going to Youngstown, Ohio after this. It's part of my job now to go around the country talking to wounded and terrified Latinas and Latinos in every community, people who've been damaged by the rhetoric, by the hate. They're afraid, they're ashamed, and I've got to try to tell them in my 40 minutes talking that they're sacred. How do you do it? Lately, I've been going like this. Remember this? And they laugh, hombre, que tortillas. And that's when you can get, you have to get something so basic that can't be denied. And I tell them, you know something? This tortilla, it's existed for 13,000 years without change. It was perfect when it showed up. It's passed down to you from Mayan people, from Nahuatl-speaking people, to you. And I asked the kids, how many people does that make every morning over 10,000, 12,000 years? More than 1 million, right? 10 million, 100 million people doing this. And I tell them, and you know why they did this every day? Because every time they patted that tortilla, they were saying a prayer for your future. And it works. It's so cool because there's always like a row of cholos in the back. And they're like, oh, damn, man, It's true. I once said at the beginning of my career, fill your pens with love or don't bother picking them up. And I got guff for that, for being a hippie or thinking I was St. Francis, and I'm not. Those in power, we think, fear our rage. We think they fear our revenge. You know what they fear? They fear your love. The power is our love for ourselves and our love for each other. That's what scares those in power now. So my mom goes to Tijuana, I'm born, and I learn a really weird lesson, that being a little blue-eyed blonde boy made me special. I was suddenly more special than many of my relatives. I was more special than my neighbors. Ay, mira el príncipe. Ay, mira el güerito, ya llegó. Ay, güerito. Every door opened for no reason except that I had blue eyes. I thought that was kind of weird, but I dug it. We moved to San Diego, and we ended up in Barrio Logan, where Juan Felipe Herrera is from. We were there at the same time, just opposite ends of National Avenue. And there was race war. There was race war between brown, black, and white. And I came out of Tijuana speaking Spanish with a Tijuana accent, white as an Irishman, and nobody in the neighborhood knew what to do with me except beat me up. So all of a sudden, the thing that was magic in Tijuana became dangerous in the barrio. So I stayed home and read because it was dangerous to get out in the street. Then we moved to a white suburb where I was one of the guys again until they figured out I was Mexican, and then I was a greaser wetback. My father, seeing this, decides, tiene que ir a Sinaloa. Let's go to real Mexico. So he took me to Sinaloa, where suddenly I was a prince again. And a few years later, when I went back to Mexico, 1980, and people were getting a little more political, they were like, pinche güero. They're mad at me. This immigration thing does not make sense to me. What's happening in Washington, D.C. obviously does not make sense to me. The president has said America first, so I'm going to take it up on him. I'm going to say, okay, cabrón, America first, starting with Tierra del Fuego and going up to the Arctic Circle. How about that? Because that is America. And once we get there, maybe we can include other people too. La frontera, to me, is just an illusion. You know, Daniel quoted that thing about me being told that it was no man's land. It changed a little bit, oddly enough, under Vicente Fox. If you'll recall, he was the one saying, pues, it's the zone of possibility. Oh. And I used to be apologetic. No, I was born in Tijuana. And now I like to say, I'm lucky enough to have been born in Tijuana. Because you have to love. You have to love. You can't be ashamed. You can't bow your head, not anymore. Our love terrifies them. Our vision and strength terrifies them. My father, he died on the Mexican border at the hands of Mexican police. It was rough, but that's what drove me to do the stuff that maybe right across the wire. And I just wanted to say, politically speaking, I published my first border-related pieces in Chicano lit journals in the 70s and 80s. My first national sale was a story about the border, which came out in 1981 in an anthology, edited by Ursula K. Le Guin. That first book came out in 93 after, yes, being rejected for 10 straight years. I was told nobody in America would ever buy a book by somebody with a name like mine. And at that time, I was just going by Luis Urrea, and I still had my Chicano revolutionary side going. So I was like, I will add Alberto. Let's see if you like it. That'd be more Mexican. They didn't like it. They went at least another 6 years not getting accepted. I started writing things for a newspaper in 1990 about the border. I've been telling this story most of my life. And it's worse now than it was then. And I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I have the natural-born evangelist belief that if I just tell this story enough times, somebody will listen and it will change. It does not change. And it's breaking my heart. But part of the reason I think now it does not change is because by demographics, Latinos, Latinas, Latinx, whatever you want to call us, people, have the numbers. We have the movement. We have the strength. We have the love for each other. And so people who have power are holding on desperately to try to keep that tide under control. I believe that to my heart. And you know, the ironies abound. I don't know if you look up data much, numerical data, but do you know that 91% of American citizens living in Mexico right now are there illegally? That's interesting, I think. We can go everywhere we want, do whatever we want. In a week, My wife and I will be going down to Guanajuato. We'll be visiting Celaya. We go to a way station in the caravan's journeys, and we'll be able to meet with some of our friends there again. Do fundraising for the No Mas Muertes rescue heroes in Arizona. There are millions of ways that we can reach out, and things like this, I believe, change the world. We work together as a union, and together we're fearless. Together, I think we're stronger. Together, we have companionship. We have fellowship. We may have love. So, at the risk of sounding like un hippie, I will urge you to strive for that. Fill your pens with love. I want to tell you a little anecdote, and then I wanted to read you a poem from my last poetry book, if that's okay. And I think then Danielle and I will have a chat, I believe, on stage, or answer questions, or whatever you'd like. Last year, I had the opportunity to narrate a ballet. I didn't think that was possible, narrate a ballet. But it was the 100th year anniversary of a ballet. Long story made short, it was a ballet about someone making an impossible journey and having to make a Machiavellian deal with the devil to find safety and home for the family and for work and so forth. And the conductor of this, who's a composer as well, quite a brilliant man, thought, the people who are making the journey now are the people who have to come here driven out by horror and desperation and hunger, trying to seek some refuge. So he contacted me and he said, could we use your text instead of the original French text? And I thought, wow, yeah, And he said, can you come and perform with the ballet? And I thought, I'm not going to dance, am I? He said, no, just read your work and they'll dance around you. And it turned out to be a really lovely evening. He brought a Tijuana ballet troupe to dance. He added a flute soloist, and the soloist was a Mexicano who used to come across the border undocumented every week to take flute lessons in San Diego, and who now directs the flute academy that he used to come to study. And it was this amazing piece. I loved it. They did choreograph me. I had to walk around. I didn't have to dance, but I had to walk around reading poems as people acted out these things about the journey. What I wanted to share with you is this conductor's name is Stephen Schick. Did another thing that I thought was brilliant and has become a touchstone in what I believe and what I try to do in the work. And this was a symphony for fronteras at the border wall in San Diego, with half of the musicians on the US side, half of the musicians on the Tijuana side. They could not see each other. He conducted with video monitors so each side could see him conducting. On the US side, it was 3 miles down a dirt road, and the US Border Patrol refused to allow people to have vehicular access. So they had to walk 3 miles down a dirt lane where they were surrounded by trucks, dogs, weapons, cameras, helicopter. So the orchestra and the listeners made the trek, orchestra carrying their instruments. The chairs were there. On the Tijuana side was llegaron, they sat. He conducted this piece to let people know that art cannot be contained. Spirit cannot be imprisoned. The trade of art together happens no matter what you do, no matter how you try to silence it. And make no mistake, what's happening now is an attempt to silence us, to silence you. It's not going to work. It can't ever work. Someone will survive and tell the story. But the punchline to this story is, after it was done, he went around to the Tijuana side to talk to the Tijuana musicians, and he said, this is very interesting, because on the US side, dogs, guns, all that. Empty, no man's land scraped. On the Tijuana side, he said there were murals, right? Graffiti, gente with children, taquerías, eloteros selling elotes, people selling ice cream, music, bright color, joy. And he said this to me, and I just want to leave this with you, and I want to read you this poem. He said, I used to live in Berlin. I lived in Berlin in the separation days with East Berlin on one side of the wall and West Berlin on the other. And he said, you know what's interesting to me? He said, the side of the wall that had barbed wires, machine guns, dogs, helicopters, you know, that was the Soviet side. That was the East Berlin side. The side with graffiti, mimes, music, parties, David Bowie, that was West Berlin. And Schick said, I'm starting to wonder which side of the wall is imprisoned. Who's free and who's being caught in a prison? He said, I think that the border wall is a prison designed for our minds, to stop our thoughts, to stop our reasoning. And I've never been able to shake it. So, no walls, if we can help it. I want to read you this poem. It's a little bit long, but it's the first poem in my last book of poetry. It's called the Tijuana Book of the Dead. But the poem is called You Who Seek Grace from a Distracted God. You who seek grace from a distracted God, you who parse the rhetoric of empire, who know in your guts what it is, but you don't know what to call it, you jerked to light from secret dreams under your sheets, forgotten by 5:15, false dawn. By the way, this is a poem to me when I was younger. You who sleep where you fall, sleep in spare rooms of your brothers, sleep in the old bed in the back of your mother's house, sleep where you are closest to a bus line, you who can't believe your ama rose at 4:45 to fry one huevo and a slice of bologna and put it on a corn tortilla, a border Benedict. Here's your chance to drag home $80 a week for her electric, for food. What's left, you spend on used paper bags, a matinee movie, amigos, more bus fare, pay tickets to get back to work. You kneel in Ama's broken shower. There's just a tub. There's no heat, plastic tarp over crumbling walls. You're going to fix that for real one day, soon. No shampoo? Shit. Well, scrub your scalp with dish soap. Shiver, it's 5:35. Hop to, got a mile to hustle to the express stop. You who have no car, rush past houses, windows bright, behind Cadillacs in the driveway. Neighbors you never speak to stir their money in golden pots for all you know. Heat turned high, showers running, and up Boyhood's Hill you biked down all those gone years ago. Head alight with high school hope. Walk on blood. Stains brown now, where the duplex bully crashed his stolen dirt bike into a trailer hitch. Last month, left teeth your homeboys count in the street. You who have echo in the bunnyman hair, go, hike fast, man, it's 5:45. You reach the bench by 6, still dark. But around you, coughing angels smoke. Guadalupes whisper Maids in sweaters, men in work boots and Levi's watching for the 50 to come, watching the clock, working for their kids, for familias, for parents, and already the blubbery radio Pharisee vomits rerun clots of fetid blood upon their heads. These calloused children, these mothers, these illegals, these greasers, these wetbacks, these narcos, these gang-related Hispanics, these beaners, these pepper bellies, these spics, these taco benders, these Aztecs, these gitanos, anchor baby makers, papists. Are they terrorists? Are they aliens? Someone laughs. So do you, all together now. Bus comes, it gasps, its doors unfold like aluminum scorpion jaws. Oh, Christ, everybody awoke before dawn and dug between the couch pillows for enough coins to pay the fare. One more late day, you're all fired. And some of you wept while digging, praying that invisible man's psalm, ay, por favor, por favor, por favor. Doors chew closed, you're in. You drop downhill toward black water and veer south to the sleeping city. Bays and harbors full of oil don't invite you to swim. Bus transfers and grim fists, worried and twisted busmen catching more buses, riders catching red trolleys to get to jobs nobody wanted but everyone needed, catching hell from foremen who've never read a single poem and never will. Gardeners, nails soiled black, they're sleeping now, borrowing small hedgerows of last dreams, mouths open, men and women borrowing more seconds of home, of Spanish, of grandparents, of mangos and bailes de primavera, of days before heavy work boots or maid shoes, days of never-ending nothing. Oh, Elohim, old days, they swayed like alamos in breezes. Days before headless men were left in the topaz dawn, were before desert women were left dismantled for buzzards in the praderas, before the Exodus. And you who cannot sleep, bless these great unseen. Stare at the world made of Alka-Seltzer fizzing away in the light. 7 o'clock, same old downtown street, same day every day, unchanged. You blink on Avenue C, fog disembarks at the docks, follows sailors drunk before breakfast. Down Broadway, echoes like the county jail cold beside you, voices, hymns of rage, inmate and trustee, some of them your cousins. In tedium, you walk silent, counting your manifold sins to the plaza. Stand in the crush of your family, these children heading for school. The wheelchair man, the woman and her shopping cart, the nodding hooker with blue tears on her cheek, paisanos y borrachos, ticos, boricuas, chicanos, apaches, taínos, habaneras, cariocas, mayas, tattooed cholo, samurai, and inscrutable, leaning back, hushed as he watches you. And you want to. You really want to. You're bursting with it. You're burning with it. You who have no words want to cup their cheeks in your hands. You want to hold their faces between your palms. You want to say it. Say it. Say it. You who have nothing to lose, say it. Say, I love you. 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 That's it.
Thank you. This is on.
Yeah, it's
You can hear me anyway. Please feel free to sit down if you're just joining us. There are plenty of seats. Thank you, Luis, for that wonderful presentation, that reading. We've got about 15 minutes. So I'll get the conversation started, then we'll just open it up to everybody. So many things to ask. I want to just start by... you said that you grew up in the same neighborhood as Juan Felipe Herrera. You started publishing in Chicano magazines and journals in the 80s. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that moment and about your interaction with the Chicano writing scene and the Chicano movement, and how that shaped you, framed you, where you were in relation to that.
Pues Daniel, it was interesting because as I was saying about our movements, and how people identify us as something or other or what they see about us, the Chicanos were very suspicious of me, man. Mm-hmm. Because, do you know Al Urista, the great poet? Yep. Alberto Urista. He took on a bullfighter's name. Yep. And he was publishing Maíz. And Maíz had published some of my poems because Luis Alberto Urrea, pues... Ándale pues, mexicano. And they were having a literary festival in Tijuana in Spanish. He invited me. We'd never met. And I went, and I was like the gabacho-looking dude, Everybody else was classic Mexicano, Chicano looking. And Al Urista wouldn't talk to me. He'd walk by looking at me like, yes, and then I got up and read in Spanish, and he came over and he said, ya me imaginaba que eras mexicano y güerito. It was like, wow. And so I'd say the first 21 years for me were just an education I didn't know I was getting. That expectations and knee-jerk responses are not necessarily what we trust. Yep. And I feel like now, especially, the irony is that everything is knee-jerk, it seems to me. Whatever whim, and it pertains to someone's life and humanity and actual survival at this point. So yeah, that's what it was like. And Al Urista became a great ally for me. And at the same time, I started working at a community college in San Diego with a great leader. He was a Jesuit sort of thinker and leader in the Chicano movement, and he was connected to all of the writers. So it was like this avalanche of writers: Ricardo Sanchez, Rudolfo Anaya, Luis Leal, all these people. And so I just found myself in a community all of a sudden that I didn't know I had. And then later, pues the Mexicanos. But it was an odd journey, It was very Americanized because that's where we ended up. If I'd stayed in Sinaloa, like my father would have liked, I'd be much more Mexicano, I think.
Okay, so there's two. I'm going to just ask one more. So, did you have interactions with Mexican writers at that time as well?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
No, it took a while, but I think I felt storm tossed, and it took a while for me to feel like the ship was in balance, and I wasn't going to tip over. That happened. The college was the place. I know we're going to run against the clock, but I'll say that being raised in Southern California, when I was raised in Southern California, because I'm old, but back then there were no Mexican or Latino or Latina authors on record. The only even vaguely Spanish-related thing I ever heard about until I got to college was Don Quixote. And as I've said often to people, the teachers didn't know how to pronounce it, so they called it Don Quixote. And I thought it was a donkey named Hody. I thought it was like a kid's book about, And when I saw Platero y Yo, that book, I thought, oh, that must be the Don Quixote. It was ridiculous. And, it was when I got to college at the University of California where people saw Luis Alberto Urrea as a Spanish name, a Mexican name. In high school, they didn't know what it was. They're like, are you French? And I just thought, I'm just going to keep quiet because I've got to survive this stuff. But once in college, then certainly the reading began. My first full-on Spanish novel was Don Segundo Sombra, Giraldes, yeah? And it was followed by Niebla, La Muerte de Artemio Cruz, Neruda. It was astonishing. It was Borges. Oh my God. For much of my adolescence, I wanted to write some version of the Circular Ruins. I was obsessed with him. Cortázar, Ajolote, I thought that was the perfect story. Or The Night Mouth Up. So yeah, it was a revelation that existed. And then as a person in my 20s, then going back to Mexico and meeting poets and so forth, I felt like I'd been able to come home.
So I'm going to open it up, but I just want to comment that I love that you're citing as references at the same time the Chicano writers as well as the Latin American boom, or and that those were happening, and I see that. That makes a lot of sense knowing you're writing.
It was of a piece for me.
Yeah.
That and music.
Yeah.
I didn't know there was, El Tri. Viva Mexico, cabrones! El Tri.
Vamos. And okay, so let's open it up. We can take some questions. Sure.
Hi, I'm Gina.
Hi, Gina.
I wanted to know, when you write, do you write in Spanish or in English, and does it get translated?
Thank you, sister. It's an interesting... Oh, yeah. Do I write in Spanish or English, and does it get translated, and what happens? It's interesting to me because a lot of what I have written up to this point all actually took place, even in the real life roots of the fiction, in Spanish. So all of my books have been translated once kind of into English. And then I was doing this sort of high wire act of trying to come up with an English narration that felt like Spanish and had relied on a lot of code switching and a lot of, locutions. And then all of a sudden I was living on the road on tour, and they suddenly wanted translation into Spanish. And I started working on The Hummingbird's Daughter myself, but it was 600 pages, and they wanted it, in a month. And I was on another book and on tour. And my cousin Enrique, who was a Mexican ambassador, said, "Ay, Luis, mira, déjame ayudarte. Well, I'll read it, I'll take some notes, and then we'll argue." And I said, "That's great, because I don't have time." And being a type A politician, he translated the whole damn book. I suddenly got a box with this. I said, "What is this?" And he had done it. And they paid him a lot of money, which was a shock to both of us. So he's sort of like, "Oye, Luis, when's our next project?" And I like to write a lot of poetry in Spanish. The other side of that coin, which you might find useful, is that when I'm here, I did not realize that I think in English. I didn't realize that I dream in English until I'm in Mexico or wherever, Colombia, Argentina, Puerto Rico, wherever I am. After a day or two, I start to dream in Spanish. I realize there's a computer program, and it switches over automatically. As soon as I hear enough Spanish, vamos al español. And then I find my notebooks filling with Spanish. So my dream is, once all of this hubbub dies down a little bit, which it will sooner or later, then I'll be able to go back and reintegrate Hummingbird's Daughter into my Spanish, the way I want it to be. There's a Spanish from Spain version, which is hilarious because, it's called La Hija de la Esperanza. And it's, in very proper Spanish, which this isn't. This is Rancho Spanish from Sinaloa and Sonora. So I want to be able to do that. I hope to spend my, my gray-haired days getting my own version of stuff back into Spanish. And I've been thinking a lot about writing stories again in Spanish. I'd like to do a collection of short stories just in Spanish and let somebody else translate it into English. That'd be fun. I don't know if that answers you.
If you want to come up, we can.
Oh, yeah, do the mic.
Yeah. Step on it.
So I wanted to ask you your opinion. Earlier you said you have an identity crisis. I feel like I'm in that situation right now too. My wife and I love traveling around the country, especially here in the US, and we love road trips. And in the past, we can easily travel to one city to another one and stop at little places and eat. Now when we travel to little places and we stop and eat, get a drink, I'm nervous, I'm scared. I am afraid that someone's gonna come up and say something, or my parents getting a phone call that one of us didn't make it out of a small town because of everything that's going on. How do I embrace my Latino, but at the same time still be an American and not piss off other people, but not piss off my culture? So that's my identity.
Ay, carnal. But, you know, it's part of our legacy, uninvited, that whatever we do is going to piss off somebody. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That was what I was trying to get at in my intro, that we're just in a time, especially now, because it's fraught. Now it's dangerous to be you. And I'm spoiled. I always tell people, I could be walking down the street with 4 Italian buddies. ICE would show up and start hassling them, and I'd be like, go Chargers, baby, yeah, and walk away. And I'm the one born in Tijuana. I understand that. But people find out who you are. You know, I've gotten death threats for being a traitor. I don't know what to do with that stuff, you know? I don't know what to do with that stuff. Just ten cuidado, man. Seriously, because anything can happen right now. We're in, I think, a very dangerous era, and anything can happen to us. You know, be careful. It's a crime. You know, it's a crime. Though I'm around the country all the time, and I have to say, it moves my heart to be in Yellowstone and see a whole family of Mexicanitos, you know. You know, because I've seen times when people have said nasty stuff to those families. So I hope that there's a turn. I hope that there's an awakening happening. You know, part of this, I know we have to be out of here by 4. I have like 2 minutes. Part of the problem is an infection of fear of the other. Listen to the rhetoric. It's always fear of the other, the other, the other. Someone's coming. There is no other. There is no other. It's an illusion. There's us. And the older I get, the more I understand we're not going to be here very long. We'll be gone. And I just want to make sure that we are leaving some garden for the ones coming behind us, who are us. I used to say this all the time, but then Bono of U2 started saying it, so I gave up because I was mad. But I always used to end my talk saying, there is no them, there is only us. And that's true.
What do we think? Should we take one more? Let's take one more question.
Yeah.
We'll see if Luis can answer, you know, with some brevity.
With brevity.
I'm reading The House of Broken Angels. I have about 50 pages left.
Yeah.
I really like your descriptions and your characters. I think I heard that some of it was autobiographical.
Yes. It's a very interesting family. She's asking about how much of The House of Broken Angels is autobiographical. My brother did die 4 years ago, and it was as said in the book, in that my family, who's a very wonderful, magical realist in spite of themselves family, they decided to give him his final birthday party while he was still alive. It happened before he died, but he was going to die shortly thereafter. So my brother found out that he was going to have a wake that he could direct and receive praise at. And when we went, it was a madness. And I've never seen anything like it. And I originally described it as the Mexican Finnegan's Wake. And I tried to hide it from the family because I was nervous, but they ended up liking it. So.
I think we will conclude there, but we can linger a little bit, perhaps out of this room and chat. But Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thanks to Sarah Dodson and the Lit Luz crew, and thanks especially to Luis Alberto Urrea for getting the festival off to such a wonderful start. Good afternoon, and thank you again.